As far as Sinwar is concerned, reading and knowing about his history, of course, he grew up as a member of Hamas in his early youth, and then he was tried and imprisoned by the Israeli authorities for many life sentences, I believe, and then he was let go as part of what is called the Shalit release back in 2011. He again became a part of the leadership of Hamas in Gaza. And in 2017, he was elected as the president, what's called the president of the Hamas branch of Gaza. In 2017, it seems like he was trying to reach reconciliation between Hamas and Fatah. As you know, back in 2007, Hamas and Fatah had a brief fight, in which case Fatah was left Gaza and Hamas took total control. This was in the aftermath of the Hamas elections or victory back in 2006. At any rate, he tried to have Palestinian reconciliation. He reached to different elements within Fatah. He invited Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of the Palestinian Authority, to come to Gaza and take over if he wanted to. He was also part of the negotiations taking place in Cairo in order to reach some kind of reconciliation or Palestinian unity. All these efforts, of course, were in vain because the Palestinian Authority president was not interested unless Hamas was willing to adhere to his three conditions, including negotiations only type of resistance. There's no resistance in terms of the resistance that different groups have been advocating. He also was instrumental of what's called the Great March of Return back in 2017 and 18. There was an effort by Palestinian NGOs within Gaza as well as other factions, but he was the brains behind this effort in trying to bring about a peaceful resistance at the border between Gaza and the Zionist entity. Of course, these efforts failed. There were about 230 Palestinians who were killed during that period. In sum, Sinwar was trying to bring about as much Palestinian reconciliation and unity as possible. He also met with Mohammed Dahlan, who is a leader or a former leader of Fatah. He had a fallout with Abbas, and he was the de facto ruler in Gaza before Hamas took over. And of course, now he is in the United Arab Emirates, basically trying to come from behind. He's known to have relations between his faction and different Arab regimes, particularly the Emirates, perhaps even Egypt and Saudi Arabia. And he also tried to have some kind of reconciliation with that, which many Palestinian groups find it strange, since Dahlan for many years was trying to oust Hamas from Gaza. As far as Palestinian reconciliation talks and Palestinian unity, there have been about 23 attempts before Beijing, which happened last month. So in total, there would be about 24 attempts between the different factions, but mainly between Fatah and Hamas, the two largest groups within the Palestinian community. All these attempts have failed for a simple reason. There have been two different outlooks, two different viewpoints, two different approaches to how to deal with the Palestinian issue. Since 1993, and I would argue also since 1974, the main objective of Fatah and some of its allies is what they call to establish a Palestinian state on whatever territory they can get back from the mandated Palestine. The historic or the infamous agreement back in 93 was predicated on that the Israelis, once they received the recognition by the PLO and Fatah and other factions, would retain 78% of historic Palestine in return for 22% to be the Palestinian state. And that objective has been the reason that Oslo was signed back in 93. And Fatah was arguing all along that within 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, that this will become reality. And of course, none of that became reality. And Fatah insisted all along, and Mahmoud Abbas in particular, insisted that there is no other alternative but to continue that route, negotiations only, knowing fully well that these negotiations have yielded no results whatsoever. The number of settlers back in 1993 in the West Bank were somewhere between 115 and 125,000. Today, they're about over 800,000. And it's very clear to any fair-minded observer that there will never be a Palestinian state. There will never be a two-state solution. On the other hand, the other factions, led by Hamas and Islamic Jihad and others, believe that this kind of approach was the reason that the Zionist regime did not return any kind of Palestinian rights, and they have been basically building for Greater Israel, and that the Palestinian cause has receded right before October 7th, has receded, and that the international community is no longer really interested in finding a fair solution to the Palestinians. Because of these basic philosophical and political differences, there has never been any success in the rapprochement or any kind of reconciliation between these two groups. Now, throughout these agreements, there would come a time, it happened at least half a dozen times, in which the groups would come and sign a document. In that document, in all these agreements, Abbas would insist on fulfilling three conditions in which the Hamas and the other groups would reject. These three conditions are: number one, that they will endorse all the agreements that the PA and the PLO before that and the Fatah-supported agreements, that they would recognize it and agree to it, including Oslo, in which these groups totally reject the Oslo Accords and what it brought about. So that was always a no for Hamas and Jihad and others, while Fatah and Abbas insist that they have to sign it. The second one, that they would have also to agree that there will only be negotiations only, and that there will not be any form of resistance. At one point, Abbas relented and he said that he would agree to what he called peaceful only resistance, whatever that means. And the other groups were open to it, but there was never really any real serious effort to define what that would mean. And third, Abbas wanted that all the arms, all the resistance arms, be under his control. And of course, that would not be the case, because that would mean that it would be rendered useless. So these were some of the conditions that he wanted. He wanted full recognition of all the agreements that he had signed with Israel that would not include any kind of dissension, since many groups do not agree that Palestine should stop on these agreements, and also that they wanted to resistance to include all forms of resistance, since this is guaranteed in international law, and not to be limited to just whatever Abbas would define what resistance is. And of course, there is a problem with security coordination, that Abbas wanted to retain the security coordination with the occupational forces, in which these groups demanded that he stop it. And of course, there have been several resolutions within the PLO and within the different organs of the Palestinian movements that he would stop it, but he never really did, in which case that has always been a point of contention. Also, as far as the foreign powers pressure, that whenever Abbas wanted to go into implementing some of these agreements that he had signed with Hamas and other factions, things like having a unity government, things like having elections so that they can renew the legitimization of his rule, because his tenure ended in 2010 and there hasn't been any elections since 2005, in which was elected, and 2006, in which Hamas was elected. And at several times they would schedule elections, but at the last moment he would cancel them. And he's been ruling by decree now for several years. And every time they would reach some kind of an agreement, there would be pressure, both from the United States, and also it would pressure its allies like some European countries, as well as pressure from Israel. These pressure will come in the form of declining to give them any kind of receipts. In 1994, the PLO and the PA signed with Israel economic agreements, by which case Israel would collect all the taxes and the customs going into Palestinian towns and villages, and they will hand over these receipts. They will take out 5% commission and they will hand over the rest. But Israel has been using this as a tool of pressure. And since Smotrich became the finance minister, he's been deducting sometimes as much as 30% for whatever reasons he finds that he could use in order to pressure even more. So whenever Israel wants something from the Abbas, from the PA, they would withhold this money. This money is basically the salaries of tens of thousands of Palestinian employees, teachers, doctors, civil servants, and so on and so forth. So that would be used, and Abbas is always fearful that if he goes too much towards accommodating these Palestinian factions who reject Oslo, that this money would be denied him. In addition to that, you have also tens of millions of dollars and euros coming to him at one point from the US, and of course Trump cut that off. Biden tried to restore some of it, not directly to them, but through other organs. But also the security forces of Abbas have been basically paid by the Americans. So he thinks that if he tries to veer a little bit more towards the other faction, that money would be cut off. And indeed, it has been used as a point of pressure. So what are the consequences if he has, if we even discount the fact that he is too old to govern and he would never be elected, there were several polls that show that any person who would run against him, Abbas would lose. All the candidates that when put together, whether they are Hamas candidates or other candidates, he would lose to them. His popularity, even after October 7th, has become in single digits. So that's part of why he doesn't want to hold elections. He knows he's going to lose. But on top of that, if he tried to accommodate Palestinian aspirations and demands, he would also lose whatever legitimacy he has at the international level by not only denying him the funds that he gets, and that's where his power resides right now, with the power of the funds that he is able to give salaries to tens of thousands of people, but also he would be totally irrelevant. So that's also a main reason why he cancels elections and why he is not moving forward with any kind of a unity agreement.